first, though, tell you a little bit about my office and explain a little bit about it, because it is a sort of unique entity, as Senator Davis alluded to. We are a bipartisan service office that was created in 1987 for the Senate to assist with anything related to international relations. And it was really some foresight on the part of the group of senators at the time who organized the office. They saw that international trade was increasing, and there were starting to be a lot of international visitors coming into the state capitol, and they were kind of wandering the halls and coming into members' offices trying to meet with people, and they decided that they really needed to have an office that would be kind of a locus and a clearinghouse for anything international. And they also had the good foresight to organize the office under our Senate Rules Committee. So, as I said, we're a bipartisan service office. All 40 members of the Senate can call on us when they have anything internationally related in their district. Our trips are open to all of our members. And as far as I know, we're the only international relations office on the legislative level in the U.S. None of the other state legislators. Usually international relations is done at the executive level and with the governor's staff. So we do have, there is also an office in the California State Assembly. However, they put it under the Speaker's office. So it tends to be a little bit more political. It's come and gone over the years as the Speaker's personal interest in international relations, waxed and waned with different speakers. So basically, our office is responsible for anything that is internationally related. We usually welcome around 1,200 to 1,300 visitors a year to the Capitol in a variety of different delegations, usually from upwards of 100 countries. So in any given week, we might be dealing with 3 or 4 different countries. And we assist with everything from a formal introduction on the Senate floor by a very high-ranking visitor, dealing with all the protocol that relates to that. And then we also do everything down to very substantive policy and procedural meetings for government officials, journalists, educators, sometimes business people, all levels of government coming to visit the California State Capitol for whatever issue. A lot of times they're very policy-based. California's been progressive in a lot of areas of policy. And sometimes it's about good governance and transparency and democratic strengthening. Obviously, the U.S. is well known for those issues, although lately I do have to giggle a little every time I talk about delegations coming to California for good governance, because if you watch the California legislature at all, you would know that in the past year we had 3 senators suspended for ethical issues. So, but sometimes you don't come for best practices, sometimes you come to learn about worst practices, right? And then share that information, like what do you not do? It's very interesting, in the early 2000s, we had a lot of international delegations coming to California to learn about our electricity deregulation program, while they were coming to learn what not to do after our crisis of 2000, 2001. So we also arrange trips for our members, so trips that other legislators from other states might engage in, like with CSG organizing it, or perhaps an interest group, the Jewish Federation, some type of nonprofit. We actually organize those types of delegations in-house. So our office does usually 2 to 4 trips a year for our members, based around whatever policy issues are kind of up and coming in that year, and also relationships that we've developed over the years. California has 28 sister states that have been developed through legislative resolution, and we keep an accounting of all those sister states. We stay connected with our different counterparts, and we have a lot of different exchanges that go on, legislative exchanges, staff and student exchanges, conferences sometimes, all kinds of different activities that are around the sister states. So that's basically kind of in a little nutshell what our office does. And when Andy told me that I had 15 minutes to talk about global protocol, I thought, well, that is kind of daunting because, as Senator Davis said, you know, the minutia is unending with global protocol. There's, depending on how you count, 195 or so countries in the world, you know, each with their own customs and behavioral standards. And so I thought rather than talking about very specific stuff, I would kind of go big picture and try to sum up how to master protocol and some of its more important elements and how we prepare our members for global engagement. So for me, I think mastering protocol is really about marrying knowledge, you know, with the art of grace under pressure. And grace under pressure, I think, legislators, judicial officials, government officials, you already know something, you know, about grace under pressure from all of the different things that you deal with in your everyday work, contentious committee meetings, etc. So, I mean, grace under pressure really is a skill that is developed, you know, from doing and from experiencing, from actually being right in the fire. And, you know, it's, well, how do you deal with the gift of pink pajamas that you just received from a very well-meaning delegation? Or what do you do after you've just vigorously shook the hand of a high-ranking, you know, Middle East official? How do you deal with those things? And that's kind of just a learned skill, and it's usually guided by, and here comes the theme, common sense and good manners. So as Anne said, I think that those really, you know, are your fallback, is common sense and good manners. And to be at ease internationally, then you just have to add in knowledge. And that speaks kind of to the first of the three elements. That the kind of three key elements that I think are really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about protocol and how you act in situations with your international counterparts. And those are be prepared, be observant, and be flexible. And the first one, you know, how do you feel confident in any situation? These really actually are, now that I look at them, they're pretty good rules for life in general, right? Be prepared, be observant, and be flexible. In any situation, you're confident by being prepared. So there's a difference, obviously, between traveling abroad on an international mission and receiving delegations at home. You know, there's the home turf advantage, the level of comfort that you have in your own circle. So the preparation, you know, really comes into play, I think, when you're participating in a trip. And that's all about doing your homework, you know, reading everything you can. There are so many sources now, and delineated a lot of great ones. And you just need to do your homework. And in addition, and she touched on this, in addition to practical information, kind of the how do I greet, how do I exchange my business card, etc., it's nice to know something about the country, the history, what's going on politically and economically there, so that when you're traveling, you have kind of a a resource base of things to talk about during those dinners when you're sitting next to someone and you need a few hours worth of conversation. We put together briefing books for our delegations, And I apologize for the small print for those of you who need glasses like I do. But I didn't want to bring you a whole big briefing book, so I just put a couple of slides together that would kind of show. We just did a trip to Argentina, and we put together briefing books that will basically give the senators, a mission statement that talks about the purpose of the trip. Know your purpose, live your purpose while you're there. That gives them all the practical information that they need. And then also gives them a lot of articles, know what's going on politically, know what's going on economically, all of those things. So the first thing I would say is if you're given a briefing book, try to read it. Try to read it. I know it's hard when you're busy and you have a lot of demands on your time, but that long air flight, is a great time to read the briefing book. And if you have limited time, then at least pay attention to kind of the big ones, how do you greet? What about dress? Business card exchange, gifts, dining, and anything that might be offensive in the country that you're visiting. If you have limited time, just concentrate on the important stuff. And while we do put together, these large briefing books, we do kind of like a 4 or 5 page preparatory note, which just details out these kind of major things. How do you greet? How do you dine? What's going to be the protocol during the official meetings? So we do that, and then we also do usually pre-trip briefings. That's, a common theme. In California, we're actually lucky to have, I think, upwards of about 130 consulates general in San Francisco and LA. I know not all states are, have consulates right in their state, but oftentimes if you talk to them, they're very excited that you're traveling to their country, and they're willing to come to you. They're willing to come to you and give you a briefing before you leave about what's going on in their country right now. I mean, they're the expert, right? They can give you a briefing about what's going on in the country politically and economically, socially. What do you need to know while you're there? Any kind of highlights. So being able to have a briefing before you go is a great thing. Again, not always possible with legislative schedules, but do the best you can. And then just network ahead of time. Your consulate generals are a great source of information. Trade representatives from other countries oftentimes have offices in your state, capital city. Chambers of commerce, there's a lot of very specific chambers of commerce. In Sacramento, we have a Slavic American Chamber of Commerce. There's a lot of resources, different associations and think tanks. Talk to people ahead of time before you go. What's it like? What do I need to do while I'm there? Those are kind of personal initiative you can take beyond, what maybe your staff or the organizers of the trip are feeding you. The State Department also, as Ann said, is a great resource. They have country desks for each country, and they have an intergovernmental affairs office that is actually specifically tasked with connecting with local and state officials, talking to them about what the U.S. State Department is doing in terms of foreign policy, and acting as a resource for questions about foreign policy, protocol, those kinds of things. So, they're great also. Obviously, if you have an incoming delegation, you're at home, you feel a lot more comfortable. You feel like you can do as you do, because when you go another place, when in Rome, and when they come to you, it's going to be your protocol. But there's still lots of care that can be taken to assure that the visitors have a good experience, and that you put your state, your economic development organization, your legislature in the best light that you can. And that is again, prep work. It's all about like the before. A little investigating ahead of time is incredibly worthwhile. And a meeting between, two high-level officials might take 15 minutes, but the prep work that's done before will determine the benefit of the meeting and how useful it is. So find out details ahead of time, so that there's no surprises. The order of rank of the delegation for introductions and seating charts. Is a flag necessary? Table tents, how should they be worded? Is it a formal or an informal meeting? Excuse me. Gift exchange, is it, token or is it a substantive gift? These things, can all be very important, and they can be found out ahead of time. That's what staff is for. That's what protocol officers are for, is to do the behind-the-scenes work so that when the actual event or meeting takes place, things go smoothly. I like to create checklists for all the important details that come along with each delegation. And each delegation is individual, so might not have the same checklist. But every time I have a delegation, kind of at the beginning, I go through and think, okay, what's going to be important when this delegation visits? And I put together a checklist for myself. Protocol is defined often as a set of rules that governs interaction. I think it also is, and I've heard this definition used before, it's really about creating a distraction-free environment so that the actual work of the meeting, the social event, whatever's happening, the trip, that it can proceed and take place without any uncertainty, and that the principals can focus on the work that they're doing in policy or trade or whatever the issue is. So now you know everything that you need to do before you go on the trip, and then what happens when you're in the middle of it, or what happens when you're meeting with the delegation. And that's when some of the other key elements that I mentioned come into play. Be observant. And this is one that just can be so incredibly valuable. When you're abroad, be observant. You can follow cues from your host. When do they sit? When do they stand? When did they give the toast? So that can be a great way, and it helps you, feel in the flow when you're being really aware and present in the moment of exactly what's going on. At home, also, follow the cues of your staff, or there's always someone who's guiding the delegation, whether that's the contact person for the delegation or your own staff. Follow their cues. They're there to assist you. We very famously had a member who just loved to walk into a room and just start shaking hands, with the first person that he saw in the room. He just loved to start, glad handing immediately, which is great. He was a very friendly guy. And but with a lot of Asian delegations, status is very important, and the rank of the members of the delegation and who you introduce first is extremely important. So I just got into the habit of, when we would be waiting in the room for, with the delegation for him to come in, just standing right in front of the door, felt like a linebacker. Stand right in front of the door. As soon as he comes in, you get the you going, and then you just sort of guide him to where, he needed to be, who he needed to say hello to first. And it took a while for him to sort of get used to that, but he did, and we had a good run, so it was fine. So just be observant. And then the last one is be flexible. know that you can prepare as much as you can, and that there's always going to be something unexpected that's going to happen. That's just the nature of things. Every trip I go on, every delegation I have, I think that my checklist is completely thorough, and then, you know, something comes up. So, but there's a couple of different aspects, I think, too, about being flexible. One is the attitude that Anne referred to. You know, be open-minded about the differences. If you're going to travel in the first place, some comparison, of course, is natural. That always occurs. But don't get fixated on it. And if you do, it can kind of take the joy out of the travel, I think, not only for yourself, but for others around you. I was with a delegation in China one time, and you know, about halfway through the trip, in the presence of the other delegation members and our Chinese hosts, this woman, you know, exclaimed that she was really surprised that they didn't speak more English here. Okay, well, we are in China, so they speak Chinese, Mandarin, or Cantonese, maybe dialect. You know, I wonder what she would think if she was in the presence of a Chinese delegation in the US, and the Chinese person said, well, I don't understand why you don't speak more Chinese here. So, and you know, maybe that person would have a point. I mean, I certainly think that we don't start language education early enough in the US, but that's an issue for another panel, right? And then another part is be adaptable to the reality that exists and not what you planned or how you think it should be, because it always changes. I mean, seating plans are a notorious one. Legislators are, you know, notoriously late or have, you know, things come up, and I can't tell you how many times I have developed the perfect seating plan in my mind, and then, you know, one of the principals doesn't show up, and it's very specific, you know, where people of rank have to be seated to the right of that person, and then, you know, all of a sudden, 2 minutes before the dinner, you are changing all of the name cards around, and you just have to go with it, right? That's when the grace under pressure comes through, and hopefully the experience. So, you know, and when you make a mistake, I think I've heard differing, you know, how do you deal with it? I think that, you know, you kind of ignore it and let it slip away when you can, if it's nothing major. If it's something that you feel like needs to be addressed, you do it discreetly. Those first two examples about the pink pajamas and about greeting someone, you know, with a vigorous handshake who maybe shouldn't have been greeted with that, those both happened to me. And the latter happened when I was very new in my career. I was very busy, had a few delegations that day, met, you know, a fairly high-ranking delegation from the Middle East, and came into the room and immediately went around, you know, as we as Americans are trained to do, you know, direct eye contact, good handshake, and got them all set down for their meeting, left the room and said, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I'm supposed to, you know, wait for them to extend their hand to me because I don't know whether they want to shake my hand or not as a woman. So, you know, rather than talking directly to them, I just pulled their contact aside. I said, I'm very sorry. You know, I'm busy. I was a little flustered. I shook their hand, you know, I apologized for that. And she said, oh my gosh, don't even worry about it. They've been in the US for, you know, 3 weeks. I can't tell you, you know, how many times that's happened, and they are totally fine with it anyway. They didn't have a problem, you know, with shaking hands. So, so that was a big shoo, and move on, you know. But instead of suffer in silence, I just tried to discreetly address it with her and then move on. And the last thing I would just say is that with all my years, 17 years with the Senate dealing with protocol, before that I worked for a large hotel company that had a lot of international guests dealing with protocol. And in all my years of dealing with these kinds of things, I've never seen a faux pas that couldn't be fixed with communication, patience, some good humor. So, if it happens, if there's something that happens, just know that it can be fixed. And also, if the faux pas is really big, just know that you're in really good company. It happens at the highest levels. I don't know if anybody remembers this. This is a bipartisan slide, since we're a bipartisan office. The slide of Mrs. Obama was when she went to visit the Queen of England in 2009, and there was a big uproar about her touching the Queen, because you are not supposed to touch the Queen. So, and there was a lot of discussion about it. But actually, the Queen was very gracious and touched her back and, didn't jump back and say, "Why are you touching me?" So, and then the one of President Bush was in 2005. He was in Slovakia, and he did not remove his gloves to shake the Prime Minister and the President's hand as he arrived in the country, which is like a huge faux pas there. You're supposed to press flesh. So not removing his gloves, that was a big faux pas. So you wonder, well, where were the protocol officers with this? But things are busy, sometimes things happen, and he did have his gloves off when he left to shake everyone's hand. So obviously someone told him. But protocol is dictated by people, and we are fallible and evolving, as Anne said. So you just sometimes have to roll with it. Things change, and so as Senator Davis said in number 6, you just roll with the punches and move on. So that's basically what I have to say.